Welcome to our lovely Tilly top. Here I'm going to show you how to make it. We have flutter sleeves, which I think are absolutely gorgeous. We've got a separated front, so we've got a yoke and an upper front, which is really nice, and just an elasticated back, which you may already know from the Connie top, which is also nice, and the straps are just sewn onto the back. I used bias binding for the edges of the flutter strap, and I hope that you will really enjoy learning about this top. Your first task is always to check your test scale. It's 2.5 centimeters in either direction or an inch, and then you need to cut everything out. You have an assembly plan, that's always the last page, and it shows you exactly which pieces come as one and which you need to assemble to create a whole pattern piece. And once you sellotaped everything together, let's have a quick look at this pattern. It's very simple. The back is just going to be folded lengthways in half. And then I'm just going to use here my lining to show you how that works. It's just inserted into the front, and that's why it's like a centimeter shorter, because we have a fold there. And then the front's put on the lining as well, and the yoke too. But now we also have a flutter sleeve, and that flutter sleeve goes in here in between those two layers. And the flutter sleeve has a slanted side which says front, so that it's got a really nice taper towards the end. So you need to make sure that you actually put the tapered end onto the front so it comes over the edge a little bit of your top. So when I turn this over, I've got my little sleeve here, it comes over a little bit further. You should always try this on before you finish it, and then it gets just slotted in between the upper and lower front, and it looks really fantastic. Now with a flutter sleeve, you need to be careful that you attach the front to the slanted front and that you cut a pair. That's really important. That means you have it mirror image so that you don't end up with two flutter sleeves the same. And they're sewn together edge to edge. Now on the back, you need to leave a centimeter seam allowance so that when we sew this together, it's completely flush. And so here you can see that quite nicely how it's done. Your flutter sleeve has a straight edge and a curved edge. Now the curved edge is much harder to hem, which is why on my pattern I mark it as the side where we put in the gather threads. However, the curved side is a little bit longer through the curve than the other side, and it looks really nice if that is the side which you hem or you put bias binding on, but it's much harder for beginners. So you have to make a decision what you want to do. Now in my case, when I made this before on the Connie, I used the straight edge for my hem because it's way easier to do, and I used the curved side to gather it. On this one, I do it exactly the other way around because I do have bias binding, and bias binding goes beautiful around curves. There's nothing to it. Whenever you have a seam, say I would add some lace to it, the same would apply. It's very simple then to put whatever edge trim you have to the curved edge. And in that case, I would use the straight edge to put my gather threads in. But if you're just hemming it and you do a narrow ruled edge hem and you are a beginner, then I would suggest that you do that on the straight side because it's much easier to do and it doesn't make much of a difference in the way it looks. It looks very similar, and I think to the untrained eye or someone that hasn't made 10 of those, you wouldn't even see the difference. So make up your mind what you want to do. If you want to use bias binding or an edge trim with lace, then you put that edge trim on the curved edge. If you want to use a narrow ruled edge hem, then you put it on the straight edge. The fabrics I've used here are really tremendous. This year I've used a load of Michael Miller stuff, and this is the Rosalinda collection, and this particular one here is called the Lillian Rose, which I think is absolutely beautiful, worked so well. And the one with the lovely writing is also Rosalinda collection, and it's called Cursive. And my bias binding is from Joann's Fabric Stores, and it's the slim line bias binding. It's quite reasonable. I'm also using fold over elastic because it's the slimmest that you can get, and it's very cheap. You can use the link to our Amazon store in the instructions to purchase a whole roll of this stuff, and it's actually really super for this sort of thing. It's dead cheap. Cutting out is really quite simple, not much to be said for it. The back is cut on the fold and our lower front's cut on the fold as well. And you can see here on the Connie top this time how a very stark contrast looks absolutely fabulous. Here it works well with the yellow and the blue. You want to mark which part is attached to the top front with a snip, because they look very, very similar, but they're not the same. And then we've also got our strap, which we need to cut out. And I don't think you necessarily need to mark which is the front, because it is the tip at the front anyway, so you know which one that is. The last thing I'm going to cut is the crop top front lining. I could cut that in any fabric, but I'm cutting it in the same fabric just because I really like it and I've got quite a lot of it. So now we're ready and we can start sewing our flutter sleeves together, and we do that in the next chapter.